I've got a question for you. What if someone brought you to a buffet, had every kind of food that you can imagine on it, and they told you you can eat anything that you want, you can eat as much as you want, but at the end of the week, you have to weigh in, and I don't want you to have gained any weight. As a matter of fact, I want you to have lost 2 pounds by the end of the week. Do you think that you could do that? My question to you is, do you know enough about what food is comprised of and how to utilize food in a manner that helps you get where you want to be? And so that's my primary question. So many of the patients that I see for the first time in my own clinic, I'll ask them, do you know the 3 components of food? And many of them don't. And so if you don't, there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone does. But food is made out of 3 things, basically fats, carbohydrate, and protein. How you approach those foods and whether you understand what they do for you will determine how successful you are in the process of losing weight, losing body fat percentage, building or maintaining lean muscle, sculpting your body if that's what you're trying to accomplish as well. So I just want to go over the different macronutrients of food and some of the foods that fall under those categories and just give you an idea of what those foods are, what some of them are. There are a long list of all of these, but I want to make it clear to you that the more that you understand about what food is made out of, how it affects your body, and how to approach it, you will have more control if it is indeed your goal to lose body fat and to decrease your weight and possibly to build or maintain lean muscle. And so I want to start with just fats. What are some of the dietary fats that you may have in your own house? Well, most of us, if you cook, the likelihood is that you have some type of oils, olive oil, peanut oil, safflower oil. You might even have butter or margarine in your house. Certainly out of that group of foods, we look at oils from the standpoint of which ones are saturated or more unsaturated. And certainly the more unsaturated oils tend to be the more heart-healthy oils. And at the top of the list from the standpoint of less saturated fats is olive oil. Olive oil is a monounsaturated fat and it is felt to be very heart healthy. As we go down the list, margarine down at the bottom is a saturated fat. The way that you can tell a saturated versus an unsaturated fat, saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature, unsaturated fats tend to be liquid at room temperature. And certainly there's a difference between olive oil or peanut or safflower oil at room temperature versus margarine or even butter. And so these are some of the fats that you might utilize in your own diet. I would tend to encourage you to stick to more lower saturated fats such as olive oil or safflower oil in terms of cooking. Carbohydrates. Now this is where it gets tricky if you really don't know much about what the components of carbohydrates are and how they affect your body, because there are at least 2 different types of carbohydrates that we need to focus on where whole foods are concerned. Carbohydrates fall into 2 classifications from the standpoint of whole foods that you might pick up at the grocery store. There are fibrous and starchy forms of carbohydrate. Fibrous carbohydrates tend to come from the ground. They tend to be vegetables, things that are grown, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, squash, zucchini, cabbage, asparagus, kale, spinach, and so on. There are a long list of fibrous carbohydrates. The benefit of utilizing fibrous carbohydrates from a dietary standpoint is that they tend to be filling. Your body has to work fairly hard to break down the components of fibrous carbohydrates to get at the natural sugars that occur in fibrous carbohydrates. And by the the important thing to note about fibrous carbohydrates is that when you ingest them and your body breaks them down and releases the natural sugars within those carbohydrates, you don't get a rapid spike in blood sugar. And by contrast, starchy carbohydrates tend to be carbohydrates that man plays some type of role a lot of times in producing. Certainly bread, pasta, cakes, cookies, desserts, those are carbohydrates that tend to have a higher sugar content a lot of time. Man has manipulated a lot of these foods so that they are broken down to such a degree that your body doesn't have to work very hard to quickly break them down into blood sugar, which usually results in a rapid spike in your blood sugar, followed by a rapid spike in your insulin level, which tends to drive excess blood sugar into the fat cells. And so anytime that man develops a food product which may have originated in nature, such as rice, like rice and potatoes, we tend to take rice and potatoes and we take them through a manufacturing or a processing process and break them down into further. We've all seen the boxes of powdered potato flakes that you pour into a bowl, add water and microwave it, and you have mashed potatoes. And that's an example of how we take foods that are grown in nature and basically break them down so that the body doesn't have to do a whole lot of work to utilize them. The problem with starchy type of carbohydrates is that because the body so quickly and easily breaks them down into blood sugar or blood glucose and rapidly raises blood glucose levels, and this is followed by a spike in your insulin level, which insulin is the hormone that tends to drive blood glucose into fat storage. You will, if you eat regularly, if you eat bread, rice, pasta, cakes, cookie, very starchy forms of carbohydrate, and you eat them in excess, or if you eat them at the wrong times, you'll tend to spike your blood sugar and you'll increase the likelihood that you will rapidly store body fat. And consequently, as I've said in a previous video, if there is one component, one macronutrient component of food that I feel is most responsible for the fact that we've got an obesity and overweight crisis in our country, it's because we have access to so many of these starchy forms of carbohydrates. So what I would tell you is that if part of your goal is to lose weight, to try to lose weight, the more often that you can focus in any given meal on utilizing or choosing a fibrous form of carbohydrate as opposed to a starchy form of carbohydrate, you will increase the likelihood that you will not be spiking your blood sugar as rapidly, and you will be able to maintain a more balanced blood glucose level throughout the day. If you're constantly seeking starchy forms of carbohydrates, say you have a bowl of cereal at breakfast and mid-morning you get a candy bar, and at lunch you have a bowl of pasta, your blood glucose is going to be all over the board, and consequently you will likely end up storing much of that carbohydrate because it's very difficult to burn that much carbohydrate unless you're extremely active. And so the takeaway message here with starchy forms of carbohydrate is that you have to be really careful with how much of these that you consume. On the contrary, most people have the ability to be a little more liberal, or actually a lot more liberal, with fibrous carbohydrates or vegetables, which don't tend to have the sugar impact of starchy carbohydrates. So those are things that I would want you to keep in mind where these two forms of carbohydrates are concerned. If you're trying to lose weight, focus more on fibrous forms of carbohydrate. In general, be careful about how much starchy carbohydrate that you consume during any given day. We all know that the more cakes, cookies, desserts we tend to eat, the more likely we are to gain weight. Well, the same is also true if you eat excess bread, rice, potatoes, pasta, and those forms of starchy carbohydrates as well. I'm going to move on and talk about protein. We've talked about the importance of protein. Muscle is made out of protein, and so maintaining a consistent protein intake throughout the day, certainly if your goal is to develop and maintain lean muscle, is very important. And some of the forms of protein that are meat or animal flesh based, chicken, beef, lamb, pork, certainly non-meat products, but something that is produced by chickens. Eggs are a fantastic source of great protein. In general, a whole egg, you can count on about 6 grams of protein from a whole egg. Now, if your goal is to develop more muscle mass or to maintain lean muscle, and you really tend to focus on utilizing egg as a source of protein, many individuals in the fitness world, bodybuilders, athletes, physique competitors that we talked about, they will tend to focus on egg whites because the egg white is basically pure protein, and you wouldn't want to take in 6 whole eggs at any one given time. You might get a little more protein in the process than if you just had egg whites. On the other hand, you would also be increasing your total fat intake and the overall calorie intake. And so people in the fitness world will gravitate towards egg whites because they're fairly low calorie, but they are a concentrated source of pure protein, and that is why those individuals gravitate towards that particular source of protein. From the water, we tend to see fish, crab, oysters, creatures of the sea that tend to be high in protein. Dairy forms of high protein tend to come in the form of cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, low fat or no fat cheese, where the fat has been extracted, leaving basically, from the standpoint of fat-free cheese, if you remove all the fat from cheese, you're basically left with an almost pure protein source of food. Soy products are another form of high protein food that come from soybeans, and there are a variety of products that various companies out there produce that are soy based, that provide a high level of protein, and there are a variety of really good soy products on the market that can meet your protein needs to some degree as well. And so that's just an overview of the components of food. Obviously, we need some of each of these at different times. The key is learning how much of what. If in general, you need some fat in your diet, and so if you tend to cook a lot at home, I'm going to encourage you to utilize olive oil as a source to cook with, from the standpoint of focusing on carbohydrates. Again, if your goal is to lose weight, focus on more fibrous sources of carbohydrates more often than not. There are times as you learn what your body needs, and certainly as you become more in tune with whether you need a faster source of carbohydrate at a given point in the day, certainly there is a time and a place to utilize something that is a more starchy carbohydrate just to give you more energy. If you're going to go out and run 4 or 5 miles, then there's no reason that someone might not be able to get away with having a slice of bread or some rice or potato or even a small serving of pasta, depending on how long you were going to go run. If you're going to run farther than 5 miles, there may even be a role for having a larger portion of any one of these. But my point here is to try to get you to understand that the more you understand about what these components of food do for you, the more you can utilize them to help you get where you want to go. And again, we don't want you to leave out any particular group because your body needs all three of these: fats, carbohydrate, and protein. I just want you to know as much as you can about these so that you can utilize them in the most logical manner possible to help you get where you want to go.